Cartographia Stellarum. Deacon Absalon looked over the sheaf of scrolls in his hands. He no longer needed lumens. The light spilling from the tall absidal windows filled the chapel with the pale gold of early Laotsumer. It had been 4 months since the events in the halls of the Iron King, the incidental title Skop Wulfgar had given to his new epic. The long winter was finally over. Outside, Neathwortha's winds carried the scent of salt and machine oil, and though the rain still fell in a fine silvery curtain, Absalon thought with a faint smile that some things never changed. The scrolls and parchment before him were the usual assortment: blessings from distant shrines, ecclesiarchal notices, invitations, and demands for records. He had spent more time in the chapel at Broadmuthaport these past months than in his seat at Southey Hill, though Preacher Tordick had not complained. The sleepy port had become busier than it had in a century. The new railhead for the armored trains now ran the length of the island, ferrying pilgrims and scholars alike. Beyond the docks, the half-built spires of the Academia Esoterica Techno-Archaeologica rose, techno-archaeologist Vane Kelev's latest venture, funded by both the Forge and the Nova Terrans. Kelev divided his time between the orbital wreck of the Eclipse of Destiny and the port below, collating finds from the buried city beneath the sea. Visitors had poured in from across the Reach, envoys from distant Forge worlds, Nova Terran scholars, and adepts from the Ordos Xenos, all bringing questions, relics, and rumors. The chapel, once forgotten, now held services almost without pause. Absalon had even considered allowing Preacher Lucia Gratner to send a few of her 5 tower preachers to assist. He didn't approve of their sect's flamboyance, but he admitted, grudgingly, that her oratory held an honest zeal, and no heresy had yet been proven. Tonight, however, the chapel was quiet. Absalon stood alone beneath the high vault, his servitor hovering near the rail with his cloak stand and staff. The old priest glanced at the relic case mounted beside the altar and smiled. The gift it contained had saved their lives and the relic hunter's expedition with it. He returned to his letters, letting the silence fill the space between the rain's steady patter. Then came the sound of metal heels on the chapel steps. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. The rhythmic click of Inquisitor Katerina Malinovska's boots echoed down the aisle, accompanied by the faint flutter of her coat. She pulled off her broad-brimmed hat, shaking the rain from its edge, scattering droplets into the apse. A mop servitor, ancient and obedient, shuffled forward to wipe them away without a word. "My lady," Absalon said, bowing slightly. She gave him a wry smile. "I was told you were in town," she replied, walking unhurriedly toward the front. She slid into the second pew and crossed one leg over the other. Relaxed and entirely unself-conscious, Absalon smiled faintly, set aside the scrolls, and began a slow, deliberate walk down the aisle, purposefully nudging her boots from the bench as he passed. "I heard you've been busy," he said lightly. "Flew off to Sarathar, wasn't it? Shall we walk? It's a fine day, if you don't mind a little rain." Her heels dropped to the stone floor with a sharp clink, chipping the edge of one of the engraved floor slabs, a depiction of a Primarch lifting a burning city to salvation. She noticed at once, and with a small frown, slid a knee cushion over the damage. Rising, she fell into step beside him, unshaken as ever. Outside, the air was cool and damp, the rain little more than mist now. The bells of the new Academium tolled in the distance, echoing between the gantries and half-built towers. Katerina tucked her hat beneath her arm, letting the drizzle bead on her hair. For once, she seemed to enjoy the weather. 4 months, she said softly. "You've done well to hold things together." Absalon looked at the sky. Faith holds what the Emperor wills. The rest is maintenance and patience. A cart pulled by servitors trundled past, carrying coils of winch cable. Behind it, a Fadtreda strode by, a huge travel tube slung between its legs like a child's toy. They crossed the cobbled road and paused. Ahead, the mouth of the great tunnel lay in the mist, the same place where all this had begun. Already a platform was being laid before it, rails stretching outward to meet the new main line, where cranes swung over a half-finished station. This base terminus, long in the planning, would soon be a 3-line interchange with a transitway connection, a system capable of carrying trains deep beneath the sea, down into the Earth's crust, before emerging at the subterranean station beneath Holmbjorg Mountain. For now, it was still little more than scaffolding and wet stone 3 miles under the ocean. Katerina folded her arms, watching the activity with mild fascination. "How's the naming going? I heard Holmbjorg City was one of them." The deacon nodded. "Yes, along with Newtown, for obvious reasons. There's Geofon Polis, a clever one, then Godric's Bane, popular at first, given the loss of the brother captain, and of course, Wolfgar's Folly was leading by votes until Voratrix put her foot down." He chuckled. After a round-table debate, they settled on Broadmuth Secundus. Katerina smiled broadly. "Apt, embracing both the old tongue of Neat Wertha and High Gothic. Very nice." She looked at him with approval. "So, how fares the city? I assumed it flooded." The deacon gestured for her to walk with him. "Completely destroyed," he said. "They sent bathyscapiums and termites down to investigate. The entire void collapsed. The cavern's gone, crushed flat, nothing remains." Katerina nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "Good, one less problem." Absalon thought for a moment, then asked, "You went to Sarathar, didn't you? How was your report received?" The Inquisitor gave a small shake of her head. "No bites. The Inquisition doesn't care. These metal men have never been encountered before, and a handful of Astartes destroyed their kingdom. The Ordo Malleus asked for any follow-up data, but beyond that, another Xenos species listed as extinct by the Ministorum." The deacon raised an eyebrow. "And what of Xenak, homeworld of Psychomancer Nekvo Thren?" Katerina's tone softened. "Captain Edwine took the Stormwheel to verify. Flotward Edric wanted to delay sending the fleet until the threat was measured, but there was none. The moon the Walsiaks reported is simply gone, vanished entirely. And as for the city of Xenak," she paused, "it's under 4 miles of ocean now. Even Worth and bathyscapiums can't reach that depth. The city's buried forever." Absalon frowned. "Interesting. And where exactly did that ocean come from?" Katerina looked thoughtful. "I can't be certain," she said, "but a merchant from the Castell Assembly lodged an official report. A forge-controlled world on the edge of the Inclusium, used for water extraction, has lost half its ocean. Apparently the Mechanicus aren't complaining. 3 new land masses have risen, perfect for commerce platforms." The deacon smiled faintly. "Merchant Prince Harrigan will no doubt thank the Psychomancer if ever they meet." Katerina shrugged. "As long as they don't send me the paperwork, he can gloat all he likes." Before them rose the foundation stones of the new Academia Esoterica Technoarchaeologica, future heart of Nitwertha's learning and hub of all that had been uncovered from the drowned city. Steam hissed from cranes, servitors hauled girders skyward, and the faint chime of distant bells mingled with the ever-falling rain. Katerina watched the construction with a faint smile. The new academy's foundations mirrored the familiar sprawl of the Weiser Academia, nestled beneath the shadow of Holmbjorg Mountain, the same layout used to train the Nevis Astra Wigathin. "So," she asked, "how much of Broadmuth Secundus actually survived the deluge? I'd think building an entire research academy might be a touch over-enthusiastic for a few flooded rail tunnels and a foyer." The deacon grinned. "As you know, I don't pretend to understand the motive force much, but I'm told the great storm-weared engines kept most of the tunnels dry, or at least the ones we saw." He gestured toward the half-built structure before them. Though only the threshold stood complete, an empty doorframe amid scaffolding, he motioned her to enter. Inside, adepts and servitors bustled through the rain, seemingly unconcerned by the elements. A few priests knelt for blessings as Absalon and the Inquisitor passed. "So," the deacon continued, "Calculus Logifexion brought down some of the devices he's been using aboard the Space Hulk." "Gravitic stabilizers or tethers?" Katerina asked, more to herself than to him. The deacon raised a hand. "You just spoke Mechanicus, and that's not in my Ministorum vocabulary. They do glow blue, though." Katerina laughed softly. "Then stabilizers," she said. A few nearby priests turned at the sound of her voice, perhaps surprised to hear laughter in a construction site dedicated to the Emperor's work. They paused by a new stone column being sanctified with oil and prayer. "So," she said, "the new station's going to send tube trains into the same tunnels we walked through? I doubt the builders ever imagined they'd be used again." "The Emperor provides for those who help themselves," Absalon replied. They both smiled, an echo of the same words he'd spoken when he'd single-handedly saved the expedition and destroyed a Xenos horde. At least, that was how Wulfgar's song told it. The deacon stepped aside, holding a sheet of oiled fabric for her to pass beneath. Hyorowulf was most pleased to find the tunnel still usable, he added. He's adding a run up and down its length to the Astartes training regimen. Katerina rolled her eyes. The captain already has his men climbing Holmbiorg and sprinting across rooftops in Weezir. Why not add a pre-imperial tunnel to the list? I believe, said the deacon, that all Astartes chapters make use of what they have. True, she said. That's what makes each one unique. They walked through the skeleton of the new academy, the sound of hammering servitors echoing from every arch. Ecclesiarchy overseers called out prayers of calibration, adjusting mech-level angles with reverent precision. Anyway, Absalon continued, aside from the tunnels we rediscovered, technoarchaeologist Vane Kelev found several sections of the old city intact, lightly flooded but stable, a symposium arena and a habitation block, mostly sealed off. He says it'll require strict containment. Even the simplest devices from the Golden Age could cause calamity if mishandled. Katerina nodded knowingly. I hope security is tight then. Oh, quite. The Arbite's watch captain. Do you remember him from our expedition? I remember he wanted to arrest you. Absalon laughed. A simple misunderstanding between new friends, I assure you. Still, he's taken security very seriously. He paused to let a group of damp sightseers from Grimness pass, umbrellas held like halos. Then he added quietly, between us, I think he's still looking for whoever left that body in the tunnel. Their laughter drew more curious looks from the nearby priests. The silence lingered between them as the fine rain fell, both lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, the deacon broke the quiet. I applied to the Adeptus Ministorum to have the Frateris militia and Gasthelm who fell made into saints, he said. Any luck? Katerina asked. Absalon shook his head. I think the Ecclesiarchy believe I exaggerated. Katerina smiled faintly. We share the same fate, I fear. Out here on the frontier, no one seems to care much. They stepped into what would one day be a grand hall. For now, it had only one wall, bare stone, half slick with rain. Above them, artisans worked on the beginnings of a mural. The strokes were rough, the colors faint, but the shape was unmistakable. It was a recreation of the mural from the starport, the one they had seen deep in the flooded tunnels, a depiction of planetary systems circling a blazing sun with the Emperor's hand raised in benediction over all. Katerina tilted her head, her voice quiet, edged with curiosity. You're recreating the mural from the starport? Absalon nodded. I requested it. The original is gone now, buried under water and stone. But its message, the unity of humanity, the Emperor's light shining even in the darkest reaches of the galaxy, that endures. Katerina studied the unfinished painting. It's ironic, isn't it? 20,000 years ago, Nitwirtha was the jumping-off point for the entire Maelstrom Reach, and now it's one of the last worlds to be rediscovered by the Imperium. Absalon gave a small nod. You see the journey's end, she smiled. Hardly. There are still stars enough for men to find. The Imperium may hold 1,000,000 worlds, but even if it gained 1,000,000 more in the next 5,000 years, it would still be a drop in an ocean of 1,000,000,000 stars. 400 billion, corrected the deacon automatically. Katerina inclined her head, amused. Then I bow to your knowledge. The deacon raised a hand in mock benediction. Bless you, my child. You have taken the first step toward enlightenment. They both laughed. It felt good to laugh. For the first time in decades, Nitwirtha seemed lighter. The long shadow that had fallen since the founding of the Void Revenants had begun to lift. The expectation of doom that had hung over the world had broken, replaced by something steadier, an acceptance that whatever came, the Revenants would face it with stoicism, faith, and their own dark humor. All Astartes chapters were different. This one simply found its strength in refusing to take fate too seriously. Katerina had omitted one thing from her report to the Inquisition, that the shades of the dead had risen once more to fight beside their living brothers. She would continue to omit that fact. Best not to complicate matters. After all, the Void Revenants were a new chapter. Perhaps, in time, they would grow out of their dead returning to life to do battle. Clearly a minor, teething problem. Outside, the rain began to fall in sheets. A shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds and struck the mural, bathing the wall and wet stone floor in a kaleidoscope of color. For a moment, the painted image of Nitwirtha at the center of the mural seemed to glow faintly, as if the emperor himself was casting his blessing upon it. Deacon Absalon turned to her. "The emperor protects," he said firmly, but with a smile. Katerina returned the smile. "I think the locals would say, Fagward." She twisted her long black hair into a bun, set her cap firmly on her head, and gave him the sign of the Aquila. Then she turned and walked into the rain, her steel-tipped boots clicking on the wet stone flagging. "Fated doom indeed," murmured the deacon, watching her go. The bells began to toll for evensong. Parishioners moved toward the chapel through the drizzle, their robes dark with rain. Deacon Absalon smiled, drew his cloak about him, and stepped into the downpour, enjoying the rain, a skip in his step. Thunder rolled above, low and distant, echoing across the newly built spires of Broadmouth Secundus. A freight hauler swept in low over the port, its engines thrumming as it skimmed the rain-drenched waves, its cargo holds filled with fresh fish from the Geofon sea, bound for orbit to meet the vast Mechanicus carrier fleet waiting beyond the cloud line. This small, wind-battered world, barely 50 years since its rediscovery, had already become part of the lifeblood of the Maelstrom Reach. Its shipyards and forge ports now fed the arteries of trade and war that stretched across the frontier, and above all else, it was home to the Void Revenants, the only Adeptus Astartes chapter in the Reach, and its unyielding heart. Far off, in the rain-swept towers of Nitward Hall, the storm was heavier than ever. The sea crashed against the fortress monastery's lower ramparts, sending salt spray across its black stone walls. On the ancient stone of the round table, the Wyrdzian sat, silent, patient. The orb of Zeno's make was ignored by all those gathered, though each of them was acutely aware of its presence. Archmagos Damaya Voratrix cast an eye toward it. She had the uneasy feeling that it was returning the gesture, in some unfathomable way. She turned back to her parchments. Chapter Master Bjornwolf Elfwine rubbed his chin and turned the picked parchment over, placing it flat on the table. The image displayed a world, once a water planet, now shrunken, with new seaweed-covered islands poking through the remaining oceans. "Well, that explains where the water came from," he said, picking idly at the scarred plates of his armor. A parting gift from a Xenos lord who had not approved of him leaving a drowning city alive. Flotward Edric gave a slow nod. "Xenoc will keep its secrets," he murmured. The hall was sparsely populated. The great round table seemed almost barren within the vast chamber. Bjornwolf sat wrapped in his fur cloak, hunched forward, the firelight dancing in the lenses of his helm. Adric rested his palms flat on the stone, lost in contemplation. Gastward Cuthelm leaned back, arms folded, his attention on the fire where damp logs hissed and spat bright sparks. Opposite Bjornwolf, Archmagos Voratrix was surrounded by a small fortress of picks, data scrolls, and brass-rimmed tablets. Her delicate hands and mechadendrites sifted through them with unerring precision. The last seat at the table was occupied by astropath Isleward, still bandaged from his ordeal aboard the destroyer Welsiax, his capture by the Psychomancer, and the mad flight through the sinking city. Before him sat the Wyrdzian, its surface swirling with faint motion. Despite being carved from obsidian-like glass polished to perfection, the sphere reflected no light, no image. Clouds churned within, gray, blue, and black, their patterns shifting like storms beneath ice. It had been a gift from Psychomancer Nek Vothren, and none among them knew what to make of it. Bjornwolf's eyes fixed on the object. "So," he said at last, his voice breaking the steady rhythm of the rain, "the Xenos threat is over. The city of the Iron King is gone, and we have a new city under the sea. Not a bad result, all told." He leaned forward, glancing from the orb to Aylward. "Which only leaves us the warning." Aylward gave a small nod. "So it appears," Cuthelm grunted, witch sorcery showing a fearful imagination. "Don't be dismissive," snapped Voratrix without looking up. "You may not like Xenos technomancy, but that doesn't mean it lacks purpose, for better or worse." Edric exhaled quietly, rubbing a scar across his jaw. They had all had this same argument before, separately. Now they were simply repeating it together. "As far as I understand," he said, "this Nek Vothren and his kind do not possess any psychic link." "Correct," said Aylward. I sense them only as absence, as voids in the warp. We agree on that much, said Cuthhelm, his tone curt. The rain fell harder now upon the towers of Nitward Hall, the sea crashing against the fortress monastery's lower ramparts. Voratrix set down the parchment she had been reading. I believe that as this race had no psychers, they would have found it remarkably difficult to communicate across an empire, yet they must have had one at some point. The reasons to build their cities, let alone the space station moon that Sigabild encountered, show they must once have ruled dozens of worlds. Possibly their dominion spanned the Arcana Inclusium, which would explain why we have never found their ruins before. So it's a glorified voxcaster, said Edric dryly. Possibly, replied Voratrix, glancing at the orb. But you would need more than one, and we don't know the range. I think it was made to convey information, not merely record it. These Xenos used mechanical means to produce psychic imagery, to convey experience. Imagine visiting a new world and, instead of sending reports back, you send the memory of the journey itself. Edric leaned forward, intrigued. Interesting. Beornwulf turned to Cuthhelm. You concur? The librarian shrugged. Seems that way. Beornwulf nodded slowly. We have all looked into the stone, he said. We have all seen this report. Silence filled the hall. Astropath Alward spoke quietly. I believe it was meant as a warning to us. I think the psychomancer was trying to show us a threat. Even his own people ignored it. Fevered imagination of a madman, muttered Cuthhelm. Beornwulf waved for silence. If it is a warning, then we should take it as offered. If not, at least it gives us something to do for a while. He sat back heavily. Only we here have looked into the stone. Only we have seen the vision. For now, we keep our own counsel. Good, said Cuthhelm, rising with his staff. Then I can stop worrying about it. If you'll excuse me, I've neophytes to train, and if left unsupervised, they'll open a demonic portal just for amusement. Beornwulf smiled faintly. Edric stood next. I've already prepared scouts. I'll deploy what elements of the fleet I can. We can cover more ground. Agreed, said Beornwulf. Edric gave a curt nod. I'll bolster the planetary garrisons on our frontier colonies, just to be safe. He looked to the astropath. And you have no ship. Come with me, we'll find you one. Their voices faded into the stone corridors beyond the hall. Beornwulf remained seated, his gaze turned from the Wyrdzin to the rain streaking down the high windows. Voratrix rose, gathering her parchments. She circled the table slowly. I hear you're bound for the Olgaroith expedition. Still interested? Beornwulf nodded, his face set. I am, perhaps more now than ever. He glanced at his battered armor, adjusting a displaced ceramite plate. Voratrix smiled faintly as she drew level with him. Then you might wish to see Osric before you leave. I believe he has suggestions. Beornwulf chuckled. Very well. I'm sure they'll be of great interest. Voratrix said nothing further. She turned and left, the sound of her steps fading beneath the rain. Now alone, Beornwulf fixed his eyes on the Wyrdzian. Within its stormy depths, the vision rose again. A world under assault. Defense bastions firing into the void as a shroud descended upon it, liquid darkness falling from orbit. Closer, he saw they were ships, millions of them. Living vessels with eyes for viewports, claws for macro cannons, and acid for torpedoes. They fell upon the planet, and the world screamed. Then, another image. Xenos creatures, tall and lithe, in gray uniforms, firing rifles down the avenues of a burning city. Others fled with their young, clutching bundles. The leader of the defenders barked orders in a tongue unknown to men. His gaze shifted to a doorway. From it came a creature of his own kind, yet twisted, with an additional arm and elongated jaws of sharp teeth. Behind it, in the shadows, stood a four-armed beast. He had seen that shape before. Beornwulf gasped and tore his sight from the orb. He reached for the reliquary box on his belt, the twin of one taken from the cultists of Manifold Dawn's Reliquiarium Vulnerati Martyris. The message was a warning, but he still did not know how much of it was yet to come. He stood, the echo of the vision burning behind his eyes, and walked out of the hall into the rain. It was time to find Brother Osric and see what he was building in the forges of Illiben City.